Pete Morris with the NSA.
We have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft.
Traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion. Over.
Move very rapidly at any speed or whether any direction it wanted to go. Why it could change and go to the right or the left or go crossways without hesitating a bit.
What do you think it was?
Well, if they call it a flying saucer, that's what it is.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over.
Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Good evening, everyone. This is Smiles Lewis. Welcome to another live edition of Anomaly Now, straight out of Austin, Texas. This is the usually weekly, live, news and media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Anomaly Archives, aka the Scientific Anomaly Institute. You can find out more about us at anomalyarchives.org. Just want to apologize for missing last week's show. I had really been excited to talk about this craziness happening around the world, but particularly in the northeast part of this country. Of course, I'm speaking of the New Jersey, the northeastern America drone zone, drone flap, drone madness. I have tons to say about this. I'm going to try to make it make some sort of sense. You know, I've had a long time interest in remote controlled aircraft, radio controlled aircraft, and then eventually we started calling them drones. I have a fond memory of being up in San Antonio on the outskirts, driving with my dad. And back then he still had CB radio in the car, police radio. And as we were driving by RC airplane airport, we could see the little airplanes flying around. I was looking at him and he's like, "Hey, watch this." And he tapped his receiver, the speaking, the mic on the radio a couple of times. And with each tap, you could see all the aircraft in the air suddenly drop as if their signals were being interrupted and that they were suddenly, going in different directions than they had been previously because the person directing them had temporarily lost control of them. Those are old style radio controlled drones. But yeah, don't want to bury the lead. You want to know what I think? Here's my elevator speech of what I think is going on. I think we are witnessing a classic UFO flap. And by that, I mean, we are seeing a ongoing situation, a flap, a wave of sightings and reports of unidentifieds flying around in the sky. And as per typical UFO flap situations, 80 to 90 or higher percentage of those sightings and reports are misidentifications. That said, that I think these are mostly UFOs, false FAUX, UFOs, UFAUXs. They're IFOs, identifiable objects, and amateur drone pilot copycats. I do think it's quite likely, though I haven't seen the evidence for this, but it seems highly probable that there is a small core of actual mystery drones at play here. I think it's also extremely small likelihood of the TRUFO phenomena, the true UFO phenomena, whatever that is. So far, I don't feel I've seen or heard any reports that fit that description, but maybe there's that 1% or less. Which leads me to wondering are we being blue booked? Are we being blue beamed? We'll get to that. Some of the things I'm going to discuss tonight are these aspects of a classic UFO flap, folklore, rumor, and how this ultimately one has to consider the possibility of psychological warfare potential. It comes down to asking ourselves, is this a natural and organic panic flap or an artificial UFO, false UFO, AstroTurf bot psyop? And then I'm going to talk about the history of my interest in past reporting on this. But before I do that, I'm going to share with you a reminder that 2 weeks ago, when I first talked about this situation, this guy had to be mentioned. And while I'm not going to go any further than this reference to the past show, it's important to know or to consider how this person, Cliff High, and his WebBots predictive linguistics process really seeded this situation where people were expecting some sort of alien invasion, a melee in the sky, as he described, a fight between the Truphos and the UFOs, the false UFOs and the real UFOs. Anyway, as I said last time, Cliff High is an anti-Semite. I don't know how racist he is, but he can't stop himself from dropping the racially specific international banker conspiracy nonsense. And so I don't really want to talk about him any more than that. We have a page of links relevant to him and evidence of his saying these sorts of things. And I've always been interested in this idea of predictive linguistics and scraping the internet and trying to use it to predict through the idea of like both normal analytical analysis as well as possible precognitive analysis. But that's a whole other discussion. But that was what seemed to lead into where we are now. Of course, that also was riding on the back of years, and especially this past year and a half to last 4 years of drone incursions at military bases. But before we dive into that, I'm going to read to you something from my dream diary. On the morning of December 7th, I woke and wrote down this dream. The drone UFO hoax above the archives. We're on a mountainside and we see a military jet soaring above and past the top of the archive building where I used to work, hidden among some trees, the building. The jet slows as it banks above the building, and it appears to hover and transform between a very recognizable saucer shape and a different kind of jet fighter than it originally appeared as. As we all point and watch, the UFO drone plane swoops closer to us, behind and up the mountainside to the now right behind us archive building, where I worked for 22 years. This is not a real landscape. It is hovering and has transformed again into some weird, blocky Minecraft thing with a checkerboard lace curtain it is deploying below itself, which is descending towards us as it moves from above the building and almost seems to be trying to catch us with this weird net-like curtain. We are freaking the fuck out. As we move to avoid the curtain, we see the man behind the curtain, or rather the people inside the curtain, and suddenly we realize it is all a hoax, and we see other nearby conspirators, all of whom suddenly realize we are onto them. I charge at them angrily, expressing how terrified they made us all. They seem perplexed at our anger. It was just a joke, man. A playful joke. Now, going back through my dream journals, I'm not very good at recording my dreams. This was a period of time that week where I was really able to recall a lot of my dreams. And when I searched recent logs, I only found one other reference from September of last year. Very brief, not relevant necessarily to any of this, but just the fact that it mentioned a drone, I wanted to mention this. And all it says is sick AJ, as in Alex Jones. Drone soul hovering above stone fort with death symbols abound. Dia de los Muertos skeletons, protests, strikes. Eating migas across from dead mat from the wheel of time. Sobbing as I say, why does everyone die? And waking up crying. Now, back to my history of interest in drones. You know, it goes all the way back to pre-2000, last century, you know, when I had created the website UFOU Visible College. And I had a subpage on RPVs, remotely piloted vehicles, UAVs, and microplanes and devices. And yeah, I was already trying to catalog all the variety, and it's just, there were so many even then, it was impossible to keep track of all the different types of unmanned aerial vehicles. We weren't really calling them drones so much back then, or even little cockroaches and ladybugs that were being microchipped so that they could spy on us all. Yes, I was very concerned about that, but it was mainly out of just the knowledge that, of course, these things can be hoaxed. Of course, we need to know about these sorts of things in order to better discern true UFO phenomena. As I continued my interest in this, a lot of it had to do with post 9/11, the fear and paranoia surrounding the events of September 11th, 2001. And out of the ashes of that, of course, were born the newspaper published by my friend Russell Dowden, APT, Austin Para-Times. And in issue 2 of that magazine, I wrote the following editorial. Flash, APT editor abducted by aliens? At 11:30 p.m. CST, Monday, April 8th, 2002, APT staff received an urgent email message from our humble editor. He's not been seen or heard from since. I've just seen a UFO. I had just been talking to someone about not spending enough time outdoors, so I decided to go outside. As I was stepping off my front porch, my attention was drawn to the new police copter circling in the sky, apparently over towards Riverside and Congress. Have you noticed the increased helicopter activity over Austin? Have you seen that police chopper harassing folks with its searchlight? I have. So I'm outside, standing on my front walkway, looking up at the stars, thinking about the UFO sightings I've had. From the silvery discs I saw moving in a straight line with black pearl on a string contrails at 30,000 feet over the Sierra Nevada, probably military craft from Area 51, to the green glowing ball of light we witnessed zigzagging above me and my friend's campsite in Gila, New Mexico. Turned out to be a hoax perpetrated by one of my campsite friends, Greg Bishop. I've never seen anything alien to my understanding, so I'm looking up at the stars and appreciating the night air when swiftly and silently an object passes above me, moving in a straight line from east to west. It was smaller than a dime, held at arm's length, but bigger than the stars behind it. It had no lights and appeared to be slightly reflecting the lights of the city. It seemed to have a main body and 2 wings, quote unquote, on either side. It was either a large bird or an RPV UAV, remotely piloted vehicle, unmanned aerial vehicle, like the Global Hawk or Predator. As I watched the object head west, I watched it turn sharply and head north, as if it were following either Lamar Boulevard or Mopac. I lost the object behind some trees as it had become harder and harder to discern against the bright glow of downtown. As I stood there thinking about going inside and writing this message, thinking that it could have been a bird, suddenly a flock of low-flying birds startled me. They were in a V formation moving from southwest to northeast. It was no bird I had just seen. I had just discovered that Austin is now under constant aerial surveillance. There is a predator lurking in the skies of Austin. Whether it's the harassing police copter or the sinister military RPV, the skies have eyes. There are news reports indicating that over half of all military planes will soon be remotely piloted. I keep flashing back to the Terminator and other dark future sci-fi AI Holocaust films. Skynet is nearly here. The war has started. We are the enemy. Prepare yourselves. Yes, I was a little paranoid, more than normal back then. That was the cover of the second issue of Austin Para-Times. And this is a scan of that editorial, just a small portion of which was what I just read. The rest was a rant about September 11th, its parapolitical aspects and its paranormal aspects, which I linked to the video I made of that years later. But my interest in these sorts of things really hinged on the issue of drones for liberty and the obvious potential abuse of this new power and technology. And of course, for years, I hosted a show with my good friend Mac White called PsyOp Radio, decoding the psychological warfare machinations within paranormal and parapolitical landscapes. And in September of 2008, we did a special drone-focused show because Mac had some very breaking, interesting news, at least to us, which we never heard anything more about, and that was that he knew of 2 witnesses to a strange incident north of Austin around the Round Rock area above, like a greenbelt type area. And basically, the 2 witnesses had been woken up in the middle of the night, like 3 in the morning, by a loud roaring jet engine sound that they thought could be a plane crashing or something like that. And there were also bright lights swirling around. And I'm going to dredge up at some point an archive of that audio of Mac relaying this, but I don't have that ready for tonight's show. But suffice to say, it appeared from the person's description, and when they were shown different types of aerial craft, they described it as seemingly more like a Predator drone or one of the Global Hawk drones, which seemed really strange because it circled their area like 10 times and seem to have really bright lights shining down. Now, I've never really heard of those kinds of drones using bright lights for search patterns, so perhaps it wasn't that. But we were pretty convinced that it was a drone. Now, that said, I've had some other incidents in my life since then that seem to be drone sightings. But there was a lot to report on back in 2008 because this was as it has been for some time, a burgeoning important issue. And as I say, drones for liberty. And what I mean by that is drones in the hands of civilians and activists are a very powerful tool to expose things. Imagine how many reports we might not have heard of people illegally dumping or various ecological disasters being perpetrated by corporations and businesses. There are so many incidents where activists, civilians have used drones to peer over property lines and discover bad doings, bad goings on, shenanigans. And so I think it's really important to realize, as much as people are now clamoring for the greater enforcement of drone control of drones in our skies, and rightly and understandably so, that like so many issues, this is the kind of situation where the powers that be can and will use it to deploy even more draconian rules and restrictions that will hinder that very type of activism, because it will also be used against them. But what it also more diabolically portends is a greater and greater surveillance state against us. And it epitomizes the modern warfare state. The opinions expressed by me on this show are mine alone and not those necessarily of this nonprofit. But I think most people would agree that remote and especially autonomous killing machines are not a good thing. Now, in the midst of all of this, a few days ago, this news headline came across my feed. Autonomous drones could patrol SH-130 as part of intelligent infrastructure. I'll just read this. Austin, Texas, new and innovative technology could be coming to State Highway 130. The Autonomy Institute says the intelligent infrastructure would focus on traffic control, security, and public safety drones. About 4 years ago, State Highway 130 jumped to the top of the list because of its uniqueness, said Autonomy Institute Chairman Jeffrey Decaux. The Institute announced Ondas Holdings as an upcoming commercial partnership to help design and enable the drone zones, but the use of drones along the highway corridor is not yet a done deal. Quote, the Texas Department of Public Safety has been involved in discussions of a concept only, a spokesperson for the department said in a statement. There is no official project or intention to implement this technology at this time. Then why the headline? For any additional questions, we'd refer you to the Autonomy Institute. Now, flash back to what I was saying about the PSYOP radio show. Among some of the other headlines from 2008, federal actions needed to ensure safety and expand their potential uses within the National Aerospace System. This is for unmanned aircraft systems. That PDF is still active. Harder to find are these archives on unmanned drone on Long Island sparks terror investigation, wherein a apparently Egyptian hobbyist was designing, I believe, a jet-propelled drone capable of carrying 600-pound cargo. Yeah, that caused quite a bit of stir, and they were flying it around. And people saw it and called attention to it. And fairly quickly, they figured out who it was and where he was and caught the guy. Now, they didn't ever, as far as I know, ever indicate that there was any potential terrorism involved, but the potential there was certainly there with that capable of a drone. Other headlines that are relevant to the more recent one I was just reading: report finds new concerns for police use of drone aircraft. There were several articles coming out of Houston who were on the leading edge of this. Houston police work to address drone safety concerns. Pilots worry HPD drones could cause danger in air. Local 2 investigates police secrecy behind unmanned aircraft test. There was a lot of secrecy at the time. And let's see, there was this other one. Oh yes, Houston, Texas, to deploy UAV speeding ticket drones. So yes, it's taken quite some time. I'm not aware of this having ever actually been really rolled out, but they were pushing for it all the way back in 2008. So keep that in mind when you hear more and more about this drone situation. All right, moving right along. We have over at the Anomaly-Archives.org website a big page. Obviously, we can't put all the links. I'm trying to be as discerning as possible and just put stuff that I think is relevant to this idea, broadly speaking, of mystery drone flaps, and or as Wikipedia has recently reclassified them as the Northeastern United States drone sightings wave of 2024. 2 weeks ago on a previous show, I mentioned how this was really making me think about the warnings in the Robertson panel, the CIA Robertson panel back in the 1950s, about UFOs not being a direct threat to national security, but could pose an indirect threat by overwhelming standard military communications, or in this case, local law enforcement communications or political channels. I mean, I'm very curious. It seems like a lot of folks haven't actually had this drone nonsense. It's not nonsense, but this drone story cross their news feeds. And that really surprises me because, of course, I'm totally enmeshed in this and been diving into it and looking for it. And it seems like, if you live in that area, you can't avoid it. I know of at least one other podcaster that lives up in that same area, and he's posted videos from out his window, time-lapse photos of what he says are drones, and he's using the flight radar stuff and says that these are not aircraft, at least according to the software he's using. He talked about being at a Walmart parking lot at 10 p.m. at night, and there being 4 absolute positively identified drones above the Walmart. But of course, that would be perfectly legal, assuming they weren't within the no-fly zone of a military base or something like that. But yeah, over at the Anomaly Archives site, we've got this long page, lots of links and information going back years. Right at the top, I've got to give props to the War Zone, twz.com. They've got a wealth of important information. They are often the people breaking these stories about military base incursions by drones. And we've also got links to other pages that I'll talk about later. A drone types webpage resource, Know Your Drones. Obviously can't be as comprehensive as actual military catalog, but it's a good introduction if you're not familiar. And then also, and again, we'll talk later about the UFO, the false alien invasion idea. But man, there are so many rumors flying. We'll get to all that. But so again, there's a resource page over at anomalyarchives.org, mystery drone flaps page. So just continuing, earlier this year in January, I was taking my walk near the house, and I was almost done with my walk, and I looked up in the sky and saw, I'm used to seeing aircraft. I can easily identify aircraft around here. And I'd seen other various aircraft, commercial jet aircraft, some small single engine Cessna type aircraft. But as I was walking back to the house, I looked up and saw what I swear I was like, oh my God, that's a drone. That looks like a Predator or a Global Hawk. And by the time it crossed the sky and I'd gotten my camera out and got a picture of it, a little speck in the distance that was, useless. And so I went online, I went to flightradar24.com. Oh, there's a helicopter coming over right now. You should absolutely learn how to use flightradar24.com. They've got a free app. It's got an augmented reality function where you can point it at the sky and adjust the distance you want. And it'll show you everything around you. And it works even inside. So you can be in the house, hear something, and point in the area and look around with the phone, and it'll overlay what it is. Anyway, so after some searching on flightradar24.com, I found what it was not a drone. Of course, that's just it. Military drones are not. There's only like one military drone that has, I think, been allowed to be registered and shown flying on various times on Flight Radar 24. But yeah, it was a small jet engine aircraft. And it was really hard to track too, because it was so much faster than everything else and just went right over South Austin very quickly. And here it is down here. I took a screenshot as it was flying over Kyle, and eventually it flew down south to South Texas to the valley and landed. And when I looked around for airfields, it wasn't actually landing at the local airport, which seemed odd. But the place it landed is in like a known border patrol town where like there's lots of border patrol activity. So I assumed it was somehow related to that. Who knows? I don't know. But that was a quick attempt at figuring out what I was seeing. And I strongly encourage you to do this playfully. Plane spotting is like birding. It takes a certain level of skill, but it's very easy. And there's tools that'll help you identify satellites, Starlink, the space station, the constellations for night stuff, and the app for Flight Radar 24, and there's others out there too, is a really good way to quickly identify these kinds of things that you may be seeing or just even just hearing in the air. Now, if nothing comes up, then it may very well be a drone. But yes, you can go to Mick West. Oh, the debunker, Mick West. Yeah, he's got a great forum over at metabunk.org. They have a subforum called Skydentify. What is that thing in the sky? Where he and others post information about sightings of things seen and try to identify them. And I think they do a really good job of this. And while I don't necessarily agree with all their determinations, I think it's a good place to start. If you think that you've seen something, they've probably already got a thread on it if it's gotten any media attention. And I was just remembering, so back in 2003, January 2003, northwest of Austin, Cedar Park, there was somebody had posted a video of something mysterious lights seen in their neighborhood. And as it turned out, it was local law enforcement testing a drone. It was local police testing a drone. And you can find a lot of information about that, all of which I find very interesting in light of where we are now today, a year and a half or more later. And some of the videos relate to Austin Police Department's testing as well. Now, back in July, I saw online about this report of I guess it's a Reaper or Predator drone. One of them's not being used anymore, and I always get the names mixed up, but had crashed out in West Texas. And local news covered this. And so I have a video of this, and I just cut it down. It was just some raw footage that they had posted, and I wanted to show this just to give you a sense of these things. Now, this type of drone has I don't know if it's a turboprop or turbojet engine, but it uses both a jet type engine and a propeller type engine. And it appears that this one, when it crashed, it was able to crash in such a way that it didn't do much damage to itself. And for a brief period, even though the propeller was bent and stationary, the jet part was still going. And you can hear it in this clip, and you can kind of see from the parts I included the kind of the hazy part from the back of the jet. I just include that so that you can get a sense of here. Most of us don't get the chance to see one of these up close, other than, again, like footage of them taking off or already in flight. But that gives you a sense of scale with people walking around and large trucks and fire emergency vehicles. But yeah, this was from back in July of this year. And so, like I mentioned, over at the Anomaly Archives website, we've got drone types webpage, Know Your Drones. Obviously, again, it can't be comprehensive, but just has a lot of stuff I've accumulated over the years related to this. And we've got links to tools for identifying aircraft. Like I mentioned, the Flight Radar 24, a Skytrack, and there's some others out there. I think there's one called Nav Radar. There's also all these tools that you can get for helping identify lights in the sky, whether they be satellites, space station, constellations, because people may misidentify normal stuff all the time because most people aren't used to looking up at the skies day or night. It's just not part of their routine. Images to give you a sense of scale of some of the military drones. There's the Predator, Global Hawk, etc. Try to get a lot of video footage available. But yeah, it just goes on and on and on. But so look at this thing, man. This is a nice short video about some of these big drones. I mean, so I guess that is what people would describe as a car-sized drone. I mean, that's not what I think most people are thinking of when they imagine these quote-unquote car-sized drones. If they even exist, we have yet to really see them, any footage, or I have not yet seen any footage of them. But again, I just tried to give a variety of examples of the types of drones that have been developed over the last 10 plus years. This little Black Hornet is tiny. There's just all kinds of them. Recently, I've seen people referencing a video from Danny Jones where he was interviewing CIA remote viewer David Morehouse, and Morehouse was saying that this drone, the Cormorant, submarine launched jet drone has continued to be developed, even though all the public information about it says that it ceased in 2008. That's the Cormorant. So it would be launched from the ocean, fly around, and then would return home, dive into the water, and then be retrieved by another remote sub and reloaded onto the launch vehicle. There's another Cormorant that was developed by an Israeli company that's a drone ambulance to pick up casualties. And I first started hearing about this late 2000s on, we reported on it, I'm pretty sure, on one of the PSYOP radio shows. Back then there were only, I think, mainly, well, I guess those videos were there. I hadn't seen them until recently looking for these. But there's just a ton of different types of drones out there, from small ones to big ones. This is such a big industry. And bear that in mind. There's just so many of them. There's no way to document them all. But a lot of them are very easy to launch and are likely, I would think, if there are military drones over New Jersey, they're likely some of these, and not necessarily what you're thinking of, most people think of in terms of quadcopters. This one particularly, the VBAT, it's a VTOL launch. It launches vertically and lands vertically, but it flies like a regular fixed-wing aircraft. And I suspect that one. This one also has been giving a lot of references to people who think that there's something to the radiation detection hypothesis about what's going on. We'll get to that. Anyway, on to the aspects of this as a classic UFO flap. I really want to thank Jeff Knox, who on his Blue Sky account and elsewhere posted links to stuff that I had not thought of in many years. From the Contemporary Legend Journal circa 2002 is this article by British ufologist David Clark, Phantom Helicopters, a Rumor-Generated Visual Epidemic. He highlights some clips from this paper that I think you'll find interesting and relevant, I hope. Potent fears invoked at times of tension or crisis can trigger rumor panics that reflect the anxieties of society. Phyllis Fox noted a condition for rumor transmission is the perceived nature of the stimulus, which must be both ambiguous and important. The role played by the news media in promoting socially constructed realities is also crucial. Newspapers and television make interpretations current and encourage others to make connections between ambiguous stimuli. In effect, fears are externalized and projected upon a variety of unconnected phenomena to produce social contagion, phantom air raids, sinister helicopters, and UFO flaps. It goes on. Following a week of unproductive police appeals, the Daily Mail put forward the theory that the phantom helicopters may, quote, prove to be an illusion. The newspaper said that senior officers remain skeptical because of a lack of clear evidence. Professor John Cohen, head of the psychology department at Manchester University, said the first reports of the phantoms might have triggered off a series of spurious sightings. He said, quote, it is contagious. Plant an idea and you get a kind of visual epidemic. Another clip. A senior officer from Derbyshire said they had, quote, pretty well ruled out that it is anything to do with illegal immigrants, but admitted the reason for the flights was a complete mystery. The absence of hard facts was replaced by speculation, and rumors spread that the helicopter was linked with drug smugglers or cattle rustling. And Jeff was saying, we see this with the current panic. Much of the drive behind it comes from the supposedly credible sightings by law enforcement, Coast Guard, politicians, etc. That adds credibility that drives the hysteria, as with now, much of it turned out to be misidentified airplanes. There still, I think, could and likely is a core phenomena here that's likely drones. There's a couple of different quotes here. In this instance, it was the police who had planted the idea as a result of concern that the sightings might have been the result of terrorist activities. It was the police who had subsequently made the most extensive sightings and had even identified a specific model of helicopter. Their press statements had created a media sensation and encouraged others to report, quote unquote, sightings, both of helicopters and more ambiguous lights in the sky. This policy appeared to have backfired when, late in January 1974, the police triggered a visual epidemic of poor quality reports, many of which appeared to relate to bona fide aircraft flying to and from Manchester's International Airport. There's more there. Thank you, Jeff Knox, for reminding me of this. Now, he does go into what was also, he was expressing frustration during our last show about people moving into the area of talking about mimicry. Mimicry by the UFO phenomena has long been a hot topic that obviously creates controversy. Journalists like John Keel, researchers like Jacques Vallée have long suggested that there is an aspect of mimicry, and hopefully Well, actually, maybe I should jump back to this if I can. Back on the Mystery Drone Flaps page, I included references at the very bottom to some of the more exotic ideas that overlap with this idea of mimicry. Again, I don't think that's what's going on here. I think the mimicry happening is simply misidentification. But as a nod towards the possibility of there being a true UFO phenomena possibly here, I include these links on that page, links to the Anomaly Archives page on mystery hums, which also dovetails with AHI, anomalous health incidents, and brain injuries related to the idea of what's been called the Havana syndrome. And I was recently reminded of the work of Kit Green and Gary Nolan and others in their analysis of the brains of experiencers. And back in April of 2022, there was an article headlined variously, "Former CIA officer reveals military officers have suffered injuries after encounters with UFOs. They woke up burned or injured. Top brain expert and ex-CIA officer reveals hundreds of military servicemen suffered brain damage or symptoms of mysterious Havana syndrome and even death after encountering UFOs." An unclassified version of Dr. Green's paper, that's Christopher Kit Green, titled "Clinical, Medical, Acute, and Subacute Field Effects on Human Dermal and Neurological Tissues," was released last year under the Freedom of Information Act and describes symptoms of multiple sclerosis, brain damage, and burns sustained by patients with close encounters of the third and fourth kind events, an apparent reference to interactions with and even abductions by UFOs. Dr. Green said he became the go-to expert for military patients who had out-of-this-world experiences backed up by witnesses and radar data, including cases of, quote, "big silent drones which hovered and moved in odd ways," quote, "showed emanations of funny lights, patterns, and strobes, and even cloaked or changed shape and instantaneously appeared and disappeared." The Wayne State School of Medicine professor said he believes some of the injuries he had seen arose from patients being too close to subtle, high-powered, highly modulated microwaves, and suggested in his study that soldiers could have been accidentally hit with powerful radio or electromagnetic frequencies from the propulsion systems of these strange, hovering, and rapidly moving aircraft. Green said many of his patients experienced burns and brain damage from their encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena. He listed his patients' varied descriptions of getting up close to a big drone, silent drone, or something even stranger. And then also there's this reference to Jacques Vallée's 1979 book, Messengers of Deception, where he's talking to the pseudonymous Major Murphy, who suggests to him the idea that UFOs are some kind of psychotronic device going back to World War II and the Nazi technology that the Soviets and the United States got. And the idea there's a lot of different ideas here, but the idea of psychotronic technologies are electronics and electromagnetic wave and radiation technologies that can affect human perception and physiology. And he basically, Major Murphy suggests to him that maybe they were like, well, this isn't a good weapon, but boy, does it confuse the enemy when you fly it over their troops. Makes them see all kinds of crazy things. Anyway, that's all there as well. So another reference that Jeff Knox reminded us of is this book, Behavioral UFO Phenomena and the Behavioral Scientist. And in part 2, it contains 3 chapters that concentrate more upon the eyewitnesses themselves. So how does this relate to possible psychological warfare? Well, of course, as you've undoubtedly heard, or maybe you haven't, there are a lot of wild claims, rumors, and supposed news. Headlines like Biden admin official offers reason for mystery drone sightings. Newsweek reporting, quote, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas on Sunday suggested that a rule change by the Federal Aviation Administration in September 2023 may be one of the reasons for the reports of drone sightings at night in the Northeast country. Now, it is true, there have been these various changes. And again, this just kind of gets to this other aspect of this, and maybe it's really the main intention, if there is some shenanigans at work, is the United States has been on the verge of banning outright the sale and use in the United States of DJI drones, one of the most popular drone brands, manufactured in China. A lot of state agencies, at least here in Texas, I believe, have already banned the purchase and use of them out of the fear that because they're owned and or manufactured by Chinese military or corporations, Chinese corporations, that there's a national security threat potential there. And so it seems like we are practically on the verge of that. And this kind of scare could end up going in that direction, or it undoubtedly will bolster that. But we've got links to those articles and regulations. But, I've heard some news outlets claiming that it's illegal to fly drones at night. That's not true. Mayorkas, I think, and others are implying that rule changed in 2023 and that previously you couldn't fly at night, but I'm really unclear about all it. I'm not a licensed drone operator, nor do I have a drone that I fly. But the more exotic claims are, of course, of special access programs, the idea of some kind of a drone corridor that was established last year near where this drone corridor of activity has been occurring, but different. And in the most recent Pentagon Press Secretary Conference with Pat Ryder, this was even mentioned. I have clips of that. And other articles like New York Post and elsewhere are reporting security experts share startling theory about who may be behind mysterious drones in New Jersey and why. So here are a couple of clips from that very recent military press conference.
AP. Tara.
Thanks, General Ryder. So back to the drones. Can you unequivocally say that none of the drones that are being spotted are DoD assets or something that's being tested within the Defense Department? Are all of these either civilian or otherwise, but just not Department of Defense drones?
You talking about the drones in New Jersey up and down yes, they are not DoD assets.
None of them are?
To my knowledge, none of them are.
Okay. And are there any sort of experimental programs going on where maybe drones are being tested that?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. What about the ones that are flying over military bases at this point? Have there been any possibilities of collecting what sort of information these drones are doing or anything like that?
Yeah, again, just to kind of put this into context, and I know that our colleagues at the White House, FAA, DHS, FBI have all made this point. So over 1 million drones registered in the United States, and on any given day, approximately 8,500 drones are, in flight. And so the vast majority of these drones are going to probably be recreational or hobbyist. They're going to be commercial drones, used in things like architecture, engineering, farming, or they could be used for law enforcement. Is it possible that some of those drones could be up to malign activity? It's entirely possible, but the vast majority, that is not, the case. And in the case of drones flying near or over U.S. military installations, that in and of itself, just given the volume of drone flights we see on a given day, is not something that's new. We take all of those seriously. We will typically, when we detect them, attempt to classify them and take appropriate measures. Is it possible that some of those are surveilling? Absolutely. But can you make that assumption in every case? Not necessarily. So in each case, commanders have the authority, installation commanders and authorities have the authority to respond appropriately, and will continue to do that.
And one other clip that's relevant to what I was saying about the drone corridor.
Pat, last year, U.S. Transcom and U.S. Air Mobility Command signed an agreement with a group called the National Aerospace Research and Technology Park. This is in Atlantic County, New Jersey. And the agreement was to create a test and evaluation corridor for UASs, unmanned aerial systems, and advanced air mobility. Is it possible that these drones that are being seen in New Jersey are part of that corridor that was created a year ago to test these kind of drones and unmanned systems?
Yeah, and I know you're not going to be surprised by this, but I've had some of your other colleagues reference that press release. I did check with the Joint Staff to see if that was possible, and again, received confirmation, no military operations, no military drone or experiment operations in this corridor.
And here is that press release that she's referring to that announced this last year. So it's just very strange. And there are a number of experts suggesting that this is some kind of drone testing. And I'm realizing I have already gotten some stuff out of order that I wanted to talk about. But There's a lot of links to this stuff on the Mystery Drones page. And there's this fellow who also suggested another. So there's a drone expert who's been talking about this idea of a leak. Because of these things flying the way they are, mostly at night, with lights, in what would seem to be a legal way, except when they're, of course, going into restricted airspace, it gives the impression, as many people have said, that they're looking for something. So these ideas about them doing searches for gas leaks, radiation detection, nuclear signature detection, some kind of loose nuke idea, this is getting some traction. And let's see, Fox New York, a headline, New Jersey mayor says there's radioactive material missing amid mysterious drone sightings. Newsweek, mystery drones could be trying to find radioactive material, aerospace CEO says. That Newsweek article says, quote, the recent epidemic of reported drone sightings across New York and New Jersey could be due to a potential gas leak or radioactive material, one subject matter expert has said. Reports of mysterious drone sightings in multiple states have drawn widespread attention from lawmakers and members of the public in recent weeks. John Ferguson, the CEO of Saxon Aerospace, a drone manufacturer in Kansas, weighed in on the topic in a TikTok post that has gone viral. And I've got the link there. You can check that out, where he goes into about an 8-minute video explaining his perspective on this. And here is the link to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There's reports of a nuke, possibly some kind of nuclear material being smuggled out of Ukraine, but there's also this, which is highly unlikely to be related to, I think, a dangerous amount. But at the USNRC site, event notification report for December 13th, there's a lot of radioactive material that's used for imaging purposes in medical practices, and it's highly regulated and it is tracked meticulously. And when it goes missing, it's a big deal. And that's what we're getting at here. Now, I find it interesting also, just as a random connection, like there does seem to have been an uptick in like these home explosions caused by natural gas leaks, particularly in the Northeast where there are colder winters. And it just seems like, I think there was a couple of weeks ago, there was like 3 in one day. I think there was one just the last couple of days. They probably happen a lot more frequently than we hear about. And, if you didn't want to alarm people, okay, I guess it makes sense to do this stuff at night. But again, I don't know that any of these are realistic interpretations. Now we get to, I think, the thing I missed. So from Fox7Austin.com, Texas drone expert believes government is behind mystery flights. I'm not going to play the whole video, but I got a couple of clips from this. It's interesting on a number of levels.
And I think that there's probably a military contractor that could be testing equipment, especially since most of the operations are at night and they're all well lit. So it's not like they're trying to really hide anything.
The flights could be an adaptation of swarm technology when clusters of drones are used for things like holiday light shows and sporting events.
They're either testing swarm detection or they're going to be testing jamming or some sort of counter drone, something of that nature. But I think it's going to be the government.
Thinks it's going to be the government, that it's going to turn out to be the government. A couple other clips that aren't necessarily directly related to this. Maybe they are. I forget. Just so turned around the last few days and weeks.
See that all these sightings may be copycats or even part of an organized hoax. 2 years ago, a report of UFOs over Round Rock circulated on social media. It turned out the so-called witnesses were part of an elaborate hoax. Robinson debunked the claims then and anticipates more trickery now.
There's probably going to be a bunch of pranksters out there trying to, do Santa Claus and sleigh and all that good stuff.
All that good stuff. This reminds me, so in 2022, we weren't doing the weekly Anomaly-NOW show, but we were still reporting on our Anomaly Archives e-newsletter about the very incident that he references there, this 2022 Brushy Creek, Round Rock, Texas drone incident that I expressed suspicions about. Now, the journalist there says that this Gene Robinson debunked this case at the time. I've looked online. All I know is he's quoted as saying it's probably drones. Somebody had suggested that there might have been lasers involved. Basically, this was an alleged multi-witness, multi-perspective video incident, which of course is very exciting. Those almost never happen. But there was several things there's one particular clip that made me think that part is CGI. And I think it's the part that he was suggesting seemed like it was a laser, but as he says, there was no cloud cover or anything for the laser to be seen on. But yeah, I looked back through the reporting on that incident, and I couldn't find anywhere where Gene Robinson, the expert that they were just saying, quoting as saying that he thinks the New Jersey thing is going to turn out to be both copycats, but also the original core sightings to be a military contractor. Again, experts are just experts. They're just humans. They make mistakes, and you can take their perspective with a grain of salt, but sometimes they have insights that the rest of us don't. But I just found it interesting that they referenced this, and I had not seen any follow-up on this, but I was very suspicious. And I think some certain news people that I will not name that were involved in this fun little hoax. Anyway, there's a page for that sighting on the Anomaly Archives website, Brushy Creek, Round Rock, Texas, September 2022. Drone sighting incidents. So moving right along. Was there other? Okay. Now, before I get into the psychological warfare thing, I know I started to talk about that and then veered off of it like a drone. Some of the best resources I found, of course, I mentioned already, the Warzone, twz.com, as well as there's a couple of videos that I think are really good. From this one, none of the New Jersey visual drone sightings have been corroborated, White House. Now, this press conference by Kirby has gotten a lot of people's feathers ruffled because he basically was saying it's all misidentification, but he then later was like, no, I'm not saying it's all that. I'm just saying that mostly that. But, maybe this article or maybe it's another one, but I've seen reports that the authorities are claiming that they have received and gone through over 5,000 reports, but only 100 of them turned out to be anything significant or anomalous or an actual drone. That's 1%, I think. So again, back to the 80-90+% haystack when it comes to UFO flaps, or in this case, drone flaps. But from this TWZ article, federal, state, and local authorities have not been able to corroborate any claimed visual sightings of mysterious drones over New Jersey, according to a top White House spokesperson. In addition, authorities have assessed that many of the purported uncrewed aerial systems spotted overhead are actually innocuous crewed aircraft like airliners. At the same time, the U.S. government does not appear to have collected any imagery of its own of reported drones in the skies of the state and cannot conclusively categorize all of the reported sightings. It's a Herculean effort that we can't expect them to accomplish. When you've got this kind of a flap and indeed growing panic, there's going to be just too many sightings to try to investigate. And as with Arrow, Blue Book, you end up with this large group that you're like, we don't have enough information, that the person reporting this did not provide us with the kind of information that we need to be able to make a determination. All of this underscores the Warzone's previous reporting about how there may still be a credible national security issue unfolding, but the discourse around the situation has been blurred heavily by hysteria, fueled by poor government messaging, yes, as well as social media accounts, and major part of the mainstream media that are propagating sightings of typical aircraft and labeling them as mysterious drones. Yes, so much of this can be laid at the foot of the mainstream media. And journalism is important. Good journalism is essential. You can't just have sloppy media journalism that shouldn't even be called journalism like we're seeing. Tyler Rogaway, who's one of the reporters for the Warzone, said mailbox, DMs, etc., full of people asking why we are not reporting on the drone stuff, considering we broke all this over many years. We are. But we have not been doing a play-by-play, as the story has totally gone off the rails with reality, and major news stories have developed elsewhere, Syria, for instance. The mainstream media has no clue what they're talking about on this issue, none, and most outlets largely don't seem to care. Local officials are very poor sources in terms of quality info on this issue. This is not a dig on them at all. It's just there is not an in-house knowledge base there that understands it, just facets of it, not anywhere near a whole picture. This is a very complex issue with many technological facets. You don't just call in a drone guy and get briefed. We have ran into this issue many times. The U.S. government messaging on this has been so absurdly poor and frankly dangerous. There is a story there we are working on, but that isn't all that surprising. This has been the way it has been for years, but at least the denials have finally evaporated. Nearly every video I have seen has pointed to mass hysteria, not a drone invasion of massive scale, with airliners, private jets, and helicopters being portrayed as mysterious objects. These videos are peddled for engagement by a growing number of online accounts. This is very unfortunate because there does seem to be something going on here, but zero critical thought, even on a most basic level of the quote-unquote evidence, only fuels rumors and fear. It also clogs the channels for relevant evidence to break through. This is true on a public consumption and governmental investigative level. It also puts aircraft in danger. We often break this stuff, but let others with far more resources run with the ball once it's out there. And there's more there, but you get his point, I hope. Again, the official perspective, you can see the posts from the Homeland Security X account there, same kind of perspective, same for US Northcom. And yet, we've started hearing more reports about airports having to shut down due to incursions from drones. The airbase in Ohio having to shut down for, I think, 4 hours. Wright-Patterson, infamously associated with UFOs. And, this is a real issue. I'm not trying to downplay it, but I'm trying to help people hopefully take a step back, take a deep breath, and engage your rational, critical thinking abilities. Listen to the skeptics and try to be a little more discerning. Okay, I guess I should round this off with what was I talking about when I refer to psychological warfare and some of the wackier ideas being expressed. I love wacky ideas. I've lived off of them as soul food for a long time. So there's been these rumors of Radar Guy, who has claimed that this is all Space Force drill exercise and that there's going to be some big event. And I don't think that they say it, but there are shades of veiled references to Blue Beam. That fabled fake alien invasion conspiracy theory that I have a warm place in my heart for, even as I know it's complete bollocks. But it fits with what we know about military intelligence operations, psychological warfare operations that involve preying on people's suspicions, fears, and folklore. Meanwhile, there's also these reports of, I keep distracting myself from getting to that, but I want to make sure to try to touch on all of this. You may have seen these headlines that say things like firefighters told to wear hazmat suits for downed drones. New Jersey mayor says this was reported over. Where is that? There's a couple of different news outlets, mainstream news outlets of sorts, patch.com. I mean, they're a hyper local news outlet, but it also appeared in their Belleville Nutley patch. Quote, some news reports and internet pundits have been circulating copies of a state level, quote unquote, intelligence bulletin with instructions for people who come across downed unmanned aerial systems. Another headline, this one from The Sun, again, not the most reputable news outlet, but certainly considered a mainstream outlet. Stay away. Fire crews ordered to wear hazmat suits before approaching mystery drones after hundreds were spotted over U.S. skies. Bellevue Mayor Michael Mellum said on Friday that his fire department was briefed by state officials, so here's a named individual, on what to do if one of the SUV-sized drones flying over the Garden State suddenly drops. That guidance does say two different things. First of all, if there is a downed drone in our vicinity, we are immediately to call the bomb squad of our county, Mellum said on Fox News. I haven't seen that Fox News clip, but there you go. There's another mainstream outlet covering this alleged bulletin. And I say alleged because I cannot find any online reference, any online hosting of it by an actual New Jersey fire safety website. Maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. Somebody, I'm sure, will find it. One of you find it. And second, our fire department has been instructed to make sure they wear hazmat suits. Now, the alleged document is titled variously New Jersey Division of Fire Safety, Intelligence Bulletin, Fire Threat Task Force, Intelligence Bulletin 24-1, Recommendations for Encountering Downed UAVs, issued December 2024. You can see that at our website. It's linked there. We have a copy of it. Mostly it's appeared on Reddit and Facebook, as far as I can tell. I have a link to where I think it should appear. And over here at newjersey.gov in their Department of Community Affairs Fire Safety Bulletins and Alerts. Last bulletin was from 2017. That doesn't seem... So maybe they just don't update their official website in a timely manner. Who knows? But I just say all this not because I doubt it, but because I'm trying to verify this kind of stuff. But it does remind us of a real known document, and that is the FEMA Fire Officer's Guide to Disaster Control, Chapter 13, titled Enemy Attack and UFO Potential, that came out in 1994, and which cites Jacques Vallée's book, The Invisible College, which does talk about, issues to worry about, ranging from radiation burns to time dilation. And one of the things I think in this alleged intelligence bulletin is number 8. Be aware that electronic devices and two-way radio systems may malfunction in the immediate area. Now, we are hearing reports, and again, I just don't know how credulous to be, but reports of drone pilots saying that they're amateur pilots trying to get near these vehicles, these mystery drones, and their own drones then suddenly deactivating and falling. This intelligence bulletin implies the kind of drone countermeasures that if these are some kind of new type of drone that's testing new technologies, that definitely seems to possibly be one of them. There's also been a whole bunch of spurious claims of drones not even getting off the ground in New Jersey, but that seems more likely to be related to, I believe, all drones in the United States. Not all of them enforce what's called geofencing, but I believe they certainly want them to, which is, again, this idea that they can make it so that you can't fly your drone over restricted areas. So if you're already within that restricted area, that your drone would not even take off and fly. I don't know if what's being described relates to that, but there was also early on this report of drone hovering above vehicle changes the vehicle's clock time. That was kind of interesting. Maybe that has no relevance at all. Maybe it's somebody lying. Maybe it's a hoax. Who knows? All right. Well, there's a lot, like I said, at the Mystery Drone Flaps page. Lots of links to the government's reaction, all the background on all the attempts at creating counter drone effects. But then I tried to create a chronological list of U.S. military incursions, both in the United States. Of course, this is the one, drone incursions closed Wright-Patterson Air Force Base airspace Friday night, the most recent one from the 15th. The recent drone incursions in military bases, joint with the United Kingdom, England, including then in Ramstein, Germany, but also links to drone flaps occurring this October in Sweden that have shut down airports there. But we've had these mystery drones in Arizona. New Jersey, of course, is what we've mainly been talking about. But they've also been reported in Pennsylvania and most recently in Texas. But I got to tell you, the picture from this article immediately, to my mind, calls to mind the idea of airplanes that are on an approach to an airport. That's another thing that's been misidentified a lot in this New Jersey flap. And I myself I have a series of photos I took one night years ago where I saw lights like this, and they're just planes on approach or taking off, landing or taking off at an airport, most likely. But again, maybe there's other incidents here. So this article from the Houston Chronicle, cron.com, Texas Gulf Coast residents now spotting mysterious drones too. Yeah, I've been realizing this New Jersey thing was going to spread. The way it was taking on a panic, it's just going to start spreading, and it absolutely has. So there's also been incidents in Utah, allegedly. There's these Department of Energy nuclear facilities, news reports that came out in June for previous instances. Got links to all that. And then we've got it back again, going back to 2023. And of course, the Langley Air Force Base incidents a year ago in December, that only coming out in October of this year. Then incidents in Maryland, and then going back to 2022 in Sweden. And of course, I'm sure there's many more. So like I said, Pennsylvania, Texas, Utah, Department of Energy, nuclear facilities, Langley Air Force Base a year ago, December 2023, Maryland last year, going back to Sweden in 2022, Arizona in 2021, incidents near Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and other DOE facilities, from incidents going from May of 2018 to April of 2021. And then there were, of course, long forgotten, but some people keep referencing it, thankfully, Midwest mystery drone wave of 2019 to 2020. And that reminds me, I did want to, Miguel Romero, RPJ, Red Pill Junkie, back in January wrote this article, Return of the Airship Mystery Drones Invade the American Heartland. This was back in 2020, before the lockdowns. He was talking about the drone wave that I was just referring to, the 2019-2020 Midwest drone wave. And he's got a really good article there. This, of course, like I said, was written 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. And he seems to believe that most of the sightings were likely of these kinds of fixed wing aircraft, but that also do have the ability to vertically take off and land. But I also found it interesting, and something I've been kind of seeing others out there drawing the parallel. Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, about Paul Benowitz and his torment at the hands of Richard Doty and others, American government military intelligence operatives, involved drones to some small extent. Maybe it was all about that. RPJ writes back 4.5 years ago, reading about all these recent news reminded me of a passage found in Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, which deals primarily with the story of Paul Benowitz and his controversial deals with Bill Moore and Richard Doty, but it also touches upon Greg Valdez's investigation of cattle mutilations in New Mexico during the mid-1970s, which forced him to become an unwilling UFO hunter in the process, since mysterious lights were sometimes reported by ranchers in connection to the deaths of their cows. On page 12, Greg Bishop writes, quote, Valdez and 3 other law enforcement officers had actually cornered one of the furtive lights in a foggy pasture late one night. In an area about the size of a football field, the cops surrounded and then approached a glowing, hovering orange light. As they closed the distance between them, the light abruptly winked out. The moonless night concealed the object as it floated just above their heads with, as Valdez says, quote, a sound like a small lawnmower mowing. This was not the typical behavior accompanied by the whining, whirring, or buzzing sounds that usually associated with unidentified furtive flying lights or craft, unless the aliens around Dulce used gas-powered engines when shifting into low gear. And RPJ continues, understand that I'm not saying the mystery drones over Colorado and Nebraska are connected to cattle mutilations, etc. But I've seen others refer to that recently. Okay, I better get to this. So all of this, of course, is reminding me of my own essay from Robbie Graham's UFO anthology, wherein I talk about the idea of TRUFOs versus UFOs. Over on my website, you can read the entire essay, which is really based on some lectures I gave, two different lectures I gave years ago. And the essay is called TRUFO versus UFO, Planetary Poltergeists and Weapons of Mass Enchantment. And as I say here, it's based on these past lectures. It has been edited to focus solely upon the probable use of the UFO for covert folklore warfare by all too human actors. That covert folklore warfare is a reference to a wonderful, legendary lecture by Mark Pilkington, author of this fantastic book. Oh, it's not going to do it. Mirage Men. Well, that's perfect that it's blurry. Mirage Men by Mark Pilkington, A Journey in Disinformation, Paranoia, and UFOs. And in that lecture, he talks about the covert use of folklore as a tool of psychological warfare. I guess I'm not going to play this clip, but the clip at the end of the lecture, somebody asks, because he was referencing a recent incident then many years ago when Iran shot down a glowing mystery craft, and he basically references back in 2010, Mirage Men was profiled by Wired.com, Wired Magazine, and the interviewer asked, what do you make of the recent UFO sightings over Iran? The Iranian authorities even claim to have shot one down last year. The unidentified objects are described as glowing or having lights on them. Do this rule out secret U.S. spy drones? Mark Pilkington. There was a UFO wave over Iran in 2004 when I first began researching Mirage Men. Many of them, not surprisingly, seen over their burgeoning nuclear facilities. Sound familiar? The Iranian Air Force announced that they'd be having a UFO conference to investigate the sightings, but I never heard any more about that. It's interesting to see how in Iran, just as in the UK or the US, initial reports of lights in the sky will quite quickly transform into more dramatic stories. The second wave of sightings in 2004 involved strange robot creatures with claw arms hovering in the skies. This kind of escalation is a natural part of the folkloric narrative process, though it's also possible that these stories were faked by witnesses or journalists to sell newspapers, or were even planted by Iran's enemies to stir up unease. Bright lights do not necessarily rule out spy planes or drones. Maybe they were there to distract attention from another covert operation, or perhaps the purpose was to generate unease and fear amongst the population with the eventual goal of destabilizing the regime. The U.S. planned to fly ghost planes over Libya in 1986 for similar reasons, though the project was never carried out. Now, what he's referencing there is a book called Deception, The Invisible War Between the KGB and the CIA by Edward J. Epstein. It is available to read on openlibraryarchive.org. And if I can find the page... The scope of detailed planning in such operations is evident in the deception scenario that the State Department, CIA, National Security Council developed in 1986 to overthrow the Gaddafi regime in Libya. It was predicated on the stated strategy that, quote, any alternative leadership of Gaddafi would be better for U.S. interests. The plan aimed at playing on Gaddafi's own paranoia through a series of covert diplomatic, military, and public actions to increase Gaddafi's distrust of his military command and vice versa. The key element, as a memo spelled it out, involved combining, quote, real and illusionary events through a disinformation program with the basic goal of making Gaddafi think there is a high degree of internal opposition to him within Libya, that his key trusted aides are disloyal, yada, yada, yada. The memo classified top secret Vector, VECTOR. I've not been able to find anything about that online, so this book may be the only source of that, which does call it all into question, but the secret Project Vector proposed such illusions as having American submarines land, rubber rafts, money, and communications equipment, which would make it seem to Gaddafi's security police that a coup is planned or underway. Meanwhile, to fuel his paranoia, U.S. deception experts would fake radio and other signals that would make it appear American planes were flying over Libya. When his Air Force launched interceptors, they, of course, would fail to find the phantoms. Simultaneously, disinformation would be planted that America and France were preparing to launch an offensive from Chad, spooking Libya armies, and articles will be planted through background briefings in the press reporting, quote, infighting among groups jockeying for the post-Gaddafi era. The rumors would be fanned by local diplomats. The idea was to keep adding events until Gaddafi's intelligence system, which was organized by East Germans, unable to find the non-existent conspirators, either became discredited or focused suspicion on innocent parties. Now, I don't know, that's a loose association, but Pilkington describes this incident in the context of the CIA and the military-industrial complex's technology known as Palladium, this ability to spoof radar returns, fake UFO sightings with various technologies and techniques, and is the very basis of his book and the documentary Miragemen, which I highly recommend. Lastly, relevant to all this conspiracy stuff is what's come to be these references to Bluebeam that I mentioned. Over at the Anomaly-Archives.org website, we have a page on Bluebeam, but also on faux, F-A-U-X, false UFO incidents. And some other things I was going to share, but this is really going back to earlier talk of drone stuff. Back in, I think this was March or April, I was at work downtown, and I was at the state capitol going to lunch. And yeah, you're not going to be able to see it there, but right there in the center, there was a drone. I was walking on the north part of the Capitol, looking north, and I just happened to see up in the distance a drone, and I was like, wait a minute, that seems awfully close to the Capitol. Should I be worried? Of course, there is this crane nearby, so I know there's a construction site, and I don't think I took pictures of them, but there were DPS nearby. But this is just to give you like the fact that, you really can't easily get pictures of them. This is my attempt to zoom in on it. It's clearly a quadcopter, and there it was more close to the crane. Oh, that's it. Anyway, there you have it. Yeah, so the faux alien invasion, this is an idea that I've long been interested in. I don't know that I'm really worried about it, but I think it's relevant to this stuff. And the best link you can find on this, we've got right there at the top, Alien Attack Unites Humanity, published by Kurt Collins and Claude Folkstrom over at the Saucers That Time Forgot blog. Highly recommend that. It's one of the most comprehensive lists of all the ideas about this. It goes back, it's mostly been in science fiction, this idea in episodes of The Outer Limits, like The Architects of Fear, this very old book from 1959, The Stars Are Too High. There's another book called The Flying Saucer that's about the same idea, this idea of scientists, government people faking an alien invasion to unite humanity against a common foe. Of course, most of us Gen Xers first heard about this idea through Ronald Reagan's multiple descriptions of this idea, that how quickly our differences would evaporate if we all just came together and united against a common extraterrestrial enemy. Okay, I keep mentioning Bluebeam. So we do also have, where is the link to that? I thought it's probably back at the Mystery Drones page. Bluebeam. The idea of Bluebeam, there's been no documentation of the idea of Bluebeam. However, all the things that would go into such an operation do seem to have been developed by these military-industrial complex actors. And you've got folks very concerned about that idea, that somehow what we're seeing with the current drone flap is going to feed into that potentially. It certainly feels like it could in terms of the panic that people are experiencing. Okay, I've got to stop. That's it. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate you tuning in tonight. And I hope some of this was helpful. Lots of ideas where you can bounce around to. Thank you, folks, for commenting and tuning in. JM, yes, thank you for mentioning the missing radioactive material. At least some of it has been found. I really appreciate that. And Holes recently heard about the sky projection. Could these drones possibly be this? I don't think so. But again, the Bluebeam idea figures into that idea potentially. All right. Well, I guess that's going to be it for tonight, folks. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you tuning in. Be safe out there, and we'll be back soon. Good night.